Welcome to Modern Musings, conversations with the maiden, mother, and crone, looking at ourselves and the world through the lens of the 21st century. Hello and welcome back. I'm your hostess, Kristen. I'm here with my co-hosts, Amber and Cindy.
Hey.
Hello. If this is your first time joining us, we're glad to have you here. And if you're returning, then welcome back. Today, we are kind of bridging off of what we talked about last week. We are talking about shadow work and what is shadow work. If you've ever heard of it or haven't heard of it, if you're like me, you're probably like, what is shadow work? I saw it and I was like, I've never heard of that before.
It's creepy sounding.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly. It sounds very dark.
Yeah, I thought it was like
disturbing.
dark magic stuff. I
did too.
And I'm such a curious nerd. I was like, let me click. So I was actually on my computer, or maybe I think I was looking on YouTube, and someone that I had followed or subscribed to from a previous video had posted something about shadow work. The person in particular, which we'll link on the blog, is Christina Lopes.
Okay.
And she's kind of like a coach, and she has a very spiritual way of coaching you versus like Tony Robbins, kind of like in your face. So her video was, what is shadow work and why you need to do it? And I was like, why is she posting about like dark magic?
Metaphysical
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and she's kind of meta. So, but I was thinking it was like dark magic, and I'm the curious ding dong that was like, ooh, what's this? You know, I wanted to see what it was because I'm a nut. So I clicked on it and I'm like, this isn't dark magic. It's actually a phrase that was, I guess, originated by Carl Jung. He was a psychotherapist, and he studied different types of the psyche or theories. And so he coined this frame of shadow work and the shadow self and how you can understand it better. And so what that means is your shadow self is the parts of you that you keep hidden or you ignore or might control the way
or you don't even realize
that's
it's
what I'm
there.
saying. You may not even know it's there, but it's parts of you that control your behavior, your thoughts. This totally loops in with Eckhart Tolle. So I'm really glad that last year in season 2, we had a whole lengthy multiple episodes discussion of that, because I feel like going back now, I actually learned about shadow work before I had read Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. But now I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense now. I actually feel like I could do shadow work better than I did before because I understand why.
Why you do what you do.
So the whole idea, just like Eckhart Tolle is saying, is that you may have experiences in your life or ways where other people have impressioned you, and you store that information, and then it becomes a part of how you react to other things or how you treat other people or your beliefs. And so the idea of shadow working is to work through those things to overcome them or to let go of those limiting beliefs or traumas. Exactly. And sometimes people don't realize that they might have a certain disposition or maybe a prejudice against a certain type of person or bias because of a trauma that happened in their life. And when we mean trauma, I don't mean like a murder in front of your face or a car accident that gave you PTSD. Sometimes that trauma is
a child falling off a bike is a trauma,
and therefore causes other things like fear of failure, which can lead to things that are very destitute for you if you continue to let that shadow affect you
or control you.
Yes. So I'm like, oh, well, I can see why this is really important. After doing a little bit of research and watching her video and then reading Eckhart Tolle, I realized, oh, wow, shadow work is important. And I feel like this is a discussion that we should be having now that we've read Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about things like self-care and goals and empowerment. How can you really get your goals or achieve those dreams if you can't get past that limiting belief from your shadow?
Right.
And so what I wanted to talk about was just what it is, what it means to you, and what you might do in your life or what you haven't done that you're thinking about or avoiding as far as shadow work, and just kind of like discussing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, go ahead, Amber. Go ahead. You had something to say.
Oh, I was just going to say, I remember I talked about in a past podcast how I was actively avoiding that shadow part, and how I'm like, I'm hoping to, get in touch more with it, because it is time to move on from past traumas in my life. And that is definitely a form. I know we talked last week about self-care. That is definitely a form of self-care.
Yes,
that
it is.
You want to know
on.
the irony in this? Okay. The whole point of avoiding doing shadow work is literally your shadow
avoiding,
you're not to do it because it does not want to be revealed. Your shadow does not want to be revealed.
Yeah, you don't want to tap inside the tap in the deepness.
Well, that's your ego. It's your ego, like Tully was talking about. It wants to keep existing.
Unvalidating your ego by breaking something down and going, oh, wow, I'm afraid to apply for that job because I fell off of my bike.
Yeah.
And then once
I have a fear of failure.
Yeah, and it's not that easy. You do not come to that conclusion that easily.
It builds. It's a building. It's like a snowball effect, really. But it does. Those self-limiting beliefs that could start as simply as a child falling off their bike can build into a snowball that is so huge that some people suffer from things like agoraphobia, where they cannot leave their home. I mean, it can be huge like that.
Yeah.
Or it could be small, but those beliefs, however big or small they are still self-limiting.
So Christina Lopes had a great example in her video, and I definitely encourage you, because she's, educated on this subject, and she's got, a degree in this area, so
and we don't,
right? So I'm like, we can tell you all about it, but you definitely should watch her video. She talks about one scenario that makes a lot of sense. It's easy to relate to.
Okay.
And I hope I haven't mentioned this one before on the podcast. I know I've talked to other people about it because I felt like it just is something that can ring home to a lot of people. Take, for example, a man and a woman, husband and wife. They go to a party. The wife sees her husband talking with another woman at the party, and she immediately goes into that dark zone of negative thoughts. Why is he talking to her? Is he flirting with her? Oh, is he cheating on me? Right? Mm-hmm. Some women tend to go into those thoughts.
Go there. They do.
Yeah, we do. The jealousy and the fear.
Sometimes it's because it's happened to them or they witnessed it.
Yeah. And that's what I was about to say. So what you do is you look at that and say, okay, why
am I triggered
by that? So triggers are the thing to look for.
Shadow
what
work,
are things that trigger
asking yourself those questions.
Yes. Finding out. Think of something or somewhere or some time or whatever that has bothered you and consider why, and take it back to like the smallest grains and really dissect it. So she said, well, this woman sits down and goes, why do I always get jealous when my husband talks to other women and accuse him of cheating on me when he's in fact not, right? So when she starts thinking about that behavior, what it is, then she realized, oh my gosh, I had been in a previous relationship where someone was unfaithful, and now I'm projecting it onto other people.
Right.
Because I'm afraid it's going to happen to me again. Her ego is saying, I don't want to feel this pain and discomfort again. And therefore, I'm going to protect myself from anything that comes close to that or resembles that.
Right.
So her mind goes into super defensive mode and jumps to conclusion that the worst case scenario is happening anytime something looks remotely like that.
Right.
So I can say, like, that one in particular, a lot of women can relate to that. Maybe not necessarily because someone cheated on them, but take it back another level. If someone hasn't cheated on you, could it be some other self-esteem thing that's causing that?
And there is a thing, like they talk about it, the why, and you just break that why down.
Why?
Well, I feel that way because I don't feel attractive. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody told me I wasn't attractive. Why do you believe them? Well, because they were my mother or somebody else, or somebody, and you just keep asking yourself, well, why? Well, why? Until you get to that very bottom kernel of what it is. And it's hard to do. I think doing my one little word every year has been a good way for me to start that process of doing shadow work, because there is a lot of shadow work involved in that, because we often talk about the negative stories that we tell ourselves, and things like that, and that's really what it all boils down to. The shadow is often very negative, because it's very protective. It's trying. It's a part of our psyche that's built to protect us.
Self-preservation.
It is. It really is self-preservation, but really it's not doing us any favors. It's really hindering us. It's hurting us. It causes more pain, because that woman at that party who sees her husband just casually talking to another woman, that jealousy that she feels hurts her in that moment,
right.
Whether he's doing anything or not.
And in the long run, she might be pushing him away.
Exactly.
And his shadow might be like triggered by something.
And you know what? That is often accompanied with that, like, infidelities sometimes are driven by being accused of infidelity.
Right. Because the wife or the husband is pushing the other person away. And so then the other partner turns to someone else. So yeah, there's I'm not saying it by any means. We're not talking about relationships, and we're not saying that the shadow self is always going to go cheat or is jealous or whatever. The shadow self, I will say, for me, one of mine has always been, I'm often triggered by people not listening to my point of view, and it causes a lot of fights between my husband and I, because if he discounts what I say, then I feel like he's treating me. I feel like he is treating me as though I don't know what I'm talking about. And when I do my why on that, it always comes down to the fact that my parents always told me things like, you don't know what you're talking about. Just, this is an adult conversation. This is not for you. And so my voice was minimized. I was told I didn't have the right to speak out. Children should be seen and not heard. And that has weighed on me my whole life. So anytime I'm trying to get my point of view across and someone interrupts me or negates what I have to say, it's like a challenge to me of someone.
You keep repeating yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's like, it makes me angry. The adult in me is going, no, it's my time to be heard. And, why don't you let me speak my mind? And, Kristen and I butt heads on this thing. She does the same thing.
Y'all really do.
We do. We butt heads on that exact same problem.
The exact same thing.
And you don't hear it here on this podcast because we keep it really civil here. But when we're talking about things before the podcast, very often we kind of go head to head about things, and I'm trying to get a point of view across, and she's trying to get a different point of view across, and we're just both sitting here going, "You're not listening to me."
Yeah. Right.
And it's very frustrating.
And it's more of like, "No, I heard you, but I'm negating
you. I heard you, but I am going to say my point of view." And I don't think you're intentionally negating my point of view, but that's the way my psyche takes it, because that's what happened to me in childhood. And so my brain jumps to that conclusion that you're just telling me your point of view is worthless. And I get that a lot. And I get very defensive when people try to shut down my point of view. So that's a shadow work that I am working on, and it's hard. Yeah. I've been dealing with this for almost 60 years now. So it's never going to be easy. And I'm not saying that it's ever going to be done, but I'm glad that I can acknowledge that and sometimes catch it in progress and let myself go, "Oh, that's what that is."
Yeah.
And there's other things there's a lot of things like that. We all carry around a lot of baggage like that. We have negative self-image. Somebody once told me I was fat. So, you know what? Even when I was skinny as a rail, and believe me, when I was young in my early 20s, I was skinny as a rail. I weighed about 113 pounds. So I was tiny, but I thought I was fat. I really, literally thought I was fat. It's a wonder I didn't become anorexic or bulimic or something like that, because I really thought that I was fat. And it was because someone else told me I was fat, or that my thighs were fat, or my butt was big. And those things live with you your whole life until you address them.
Right. And sometimes they live on the surface, and they're like the repeated thing that you hear over and over again, and then sometimes they are under the surface and you don't even notice.
You don't realize that they're there.
Right. And you don't think about them as something that affects you until you just keep digging and digging and digging. My biological father is he has a whole nother life of his own. He has a whole nother family I have other siblings that, he raised, and he has a wife, and he lives in another town. And I had this misconception in my life of what it was supposed to be, our relationship. And I lived a good portion of my life feeling the feelings that I felt that he should feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that's what I was doing until I really stopped and thought about it. And I thought, it's not my responsibility to feel those feelings for him. And I am not the one to say that that's how he should or shouldn't feel. That's none of my business. And when I finally sat down and really thought about why I felt a certain way about our relationship, it took so much weight off of my shoulders, that responsibility that I was putting on myself. And our relationship hasn't changed in any way, but my relationship with myself has changed.
Right.
And my expectations have changed about the relationship. And I think that is one of the parts of the shadow, is that we have expectations of how other people should treat us, or how other people should treat other people, for that matter. Right. And so sometimes whenever we have that expectation and we just live our lives forever stuck in this expectation, then we have a hard time coping when
it doesn't live up to that reality.
Exactly.
Right.
When those expectations aren't met, and then we project onto other people when
our reasoning for their behavior.
Yes, our reasoning for their behavior. And that's just really coming to the point where that's not my business.
Right.
was really like crucial for me. So I wanted to see what methods that you guys, I know Amber, you had said that you were avoiding doing the power sheets
because she didn't want to
Cultivate What Matters last year, because you didn't want to dive deep.
Didn't want to ask myself the deep questions.
And to be honest, I felt like although those were deep questions,
they weren't really
like
deep enough.
They really weren't that deep. They just barely tapped the surface.
Yes. Last year, well, mainly the year before, I was going through a lot, and I just really wasn't ready to tap the surface.
You were still treading water. I mean, you were newly divorced when we started Modern Musings.
Right.
Yes.
And you were treading water, really, literally. You were just treading water, trying to keep your head above. And I get that. You can't swim until you can learn to tread water and to hold your breath and to push out your breath under the water or whatever, so you had to do a lot of that. And I think we've talked about that in another episode as well.
We have, yes.
Yeah.
So, you can't grow until you're in a safe place.
Right.
You have to take care of your safety first. And that's what you had to do.
Yeah.
Right.
And I still have those moments where something I feel, like I feel threatened and I lash out, but it's definitely something that I am working on, the why of my insecurities about certain things.
What are some things that you have thought that you would like to do to get you started? Have you thought about, like, if you're ready?
Well, I know something that really helped me get through 2020 and 2021 was journaling. And so I have picked that up again. And I'm, really like I feel like journaling would be a good way to get started with my shadow work, like asking myself those deep questions and then going, like you said, why? Mm-hmm. Why is this happening? Why is that happening?
I agree with you on the journaling part, because I think you can sit and talk to yourself and think about things all you want.
Yeah.
You can lay in bed at night and beat yourself up, but are you actually, like,
getting anywhere?
Really?
Are you going anywhere with it, or are you just repeating a narrative? I feel like once you write something down, you wouldn't sit and write the same negative phrase over and
once
over
you write it down, it's out there.
Exactly. And once you're
out
writing
in
it down,
the world.
it's truth.
When you name it, you claim it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's truth.
I think, like, I do a lot of, like, thinking and stuff like that, in bed or whatever, but in the car, I do a lot of, like, thinking out loud about things in the car, which is unhealthy because it's hard to write things down when you're in the car, even voice to note, which I've done before.
Yeah.
But, that doesn't always work as well, but
serious.
I have written poems while driving before. It's not safe.
Right. Whenever creativity strikes, you have
to take advantage of it.
Yes.
Yes. But hey, Siri, take a note.
Yeah.
I have tried that too, like taking a note and writing poetry at the same time.
Yeah, I do that. I say, Siri, take a note, and I'll start doing whatever. But she doesn't always understand me. I do have a Texas drawl, twang, whatever
Siri
you want to call
really
it.
doesn't understand that at all.
So yes, Amber, journaling is the best way, I think, or one of the best ways.
One of the best ways, yeah.
To speak your truth, right, and acknowledge it, because I think it's something about acknowledging it. Just talking about it doesn't let you dive in as deep. But once you write it on paper, then it's like, okay, I need to move on to the next thought. Mm-hmm. One thing that I thought of that was really helpful was art journaling, or just doing some type of creative art.
Or art therapy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some people do art therapy.
Yeah, I did a couple of drawings that were related around like limiting beliefs, and this was actually something that stemmed from my like a therapy session where we were talking about obstacles that were keeping me from being creative, and it inspired me to draw that metaphorically, and that actually like tapped into that creativity that was being suppressed from other things, mm-hmm. other stresses, because other stresses were actually keeping me from being creative. And it wasn't necessarily like me just telling myself like I can't draw. I wasn't having that like creative block. I was having
I have no ideas of what to draw.
No, mine was just other things like flooding my mind that were stressing me out. Like, ooh, I need to do this. I need to do that.
So you're not taking the time to draw also.
No, I was having a hard time turning my mind off of the other things that were distracting me. Like, oh, I need to pay this bill, and this thing at work is troubling me. Mm-hmm. So I was having a block in that sense. And so, I did a drawing, and I felt like that, just kind of like meditating on that helped me with my shadow work.
Yeah, so. In that sense, like the one little word, a lot of times carries an artistic component, or it does for me. I do a lot of writing, journaling in it as well, but I do a lot of collage and mm-hmm. photography as part of my one little word, which in turn is my shadow work, because, I use my camera, or I use my collage, my paper and magazines and glue to piece together thoughts and feelings that I'm having. And they may not speak to anybody else, but I know what they mean when I see them. And I am working through those thought processes while I'm in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big component of it. And like I said, I journal as well. So the art journaling goes along with that writing out my thoughts or whatever. Mm-hmm. So those are really two really good examples of ways to work through your shadow work. I can't remember what this is called, but Ashley has talked about it before, and I will ask her about it and link it in the blog. But there is a thing where you look at your family tree. Ashley had to do this. For those of you who don't know, Ashley is my niece. She has her bachelor's in psychology, and while she was, and she is currently working towards her master's, because she wants to be a fine counselor someday. And I often ask her questions. We talk about psychology and things like that from time to time. And I remember her doing a project where she had to list out her family tree and list out the family dispositions of the family members. So, whether they were living or deceased, whether any of them had alcoholism or drug abuse tendencies, any mental illness, anxiety disorders, things like that. And she had to do this whole thing, to talk about, because sometimes those are inherited and sometimes they are just passed down as family trauma. And they're, those are things to look at also when you're doing your shadow work, because it might not just be your trauma. It might be somebody else's trauma that you are carrying with you.
Which is probably why we argue, because I have the same disposition that you do to want to be.
And I think some of that probably comes from my mother, because my mother married at the age of 16 and became a mother at 17. And she often bucked against the system. She wanted to do things her way. She wanted to make up her own mind about things. She wanted people to give her respect for certain, things when she felt like it was not happening to her. So, her need to her being felt like she was discounted because she was only 16 years old, and she was angry at her mother for not treating her like she was grown up or whatever, or not letting her do what she wanted to do when she was 16 years old, led to her getting married at a young age, led to her having children at a young age, and then she fed or let that shadow self grow, and then that shadow self developed in me, and that shadow self developed in you, and hopefully we're becoming aware of it now and trying to break that pattern, but it's there nonetheless.
So one of the other ways to identify like your shadow is the projection mirror. And we've talked about this before. When you are seeing something in someone that you don't like, you are seeing a piece of yourself that you don't like.
Yes. So you recognize it because it's in you.
Different scenario than the woman who sees her husband cheating on her or accusing her husband, of cheating on her because her shadow is keeping her from being hurt. The projection mirror is when you might look at someone in a different class.
You might think people are
and think of them as
thieves
different.
Or cheaters or whatever because you are afraid you have that tendency yourself.
Or when you see someone driving in a hoopty on the road and you're like, ugh, get out of my way with your nasty looking car. It's because you have possibly had a ugly car or rundown car, and you devalued what it was like to be that person.
Right.
So those are similar things.
There's a lot of different reactions.
Seeing that reaction. I mean, there's so many different ways that you could apply that to yourself. But so those are, maybe like for my mom and myself, whenever we get in a little argument, she will shout at me and tell me I'm not listening to her, but she's doing the same thing to me.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's where we will butt heads because we're both doing the exact same thing to each other
at the same time.
Don't like.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the projection mirror, where you're literally treating someone the way that you don't like to be treated inadvertently. You don't even notice that you're doing it most of the time, like cutting or trying to get in front of people. Not necessarily like cutting in line, but trying to cut people off on the road because they cut you off.
Yes. It's reactionary. Everything is reactionary.
Yes.
Yeah. Like I said, I was thinking of ways, we're talking about ways to work through those things, and obviously journaling and art therapy and things like that. I'm
curious, are there other ways
to treat it? I'm thinking one of the things I was looking at was talking about gratitude. So if you start out from a place of gratitude and gratitude for your shadow self for protecting you, because it's there for a reason. We're not saying
that's part of the shadow work process is acknowledging it.
So that you can
integrate it with yourself.
With your psyche.
Because it's two separate parts of you.
Yes.
You're your normal everyday person, and then all of a sudden your shadow takes over.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of times we're out of control at that point.
Right,
Your ego is driving.
And so acknowledging that part of yourself, and I think it's essential that at times when you are feeling triggered, to pause. That is the part of the big thing right there. Just pause and stop and think about it. What is triggering you? Why is it triggering you? What does that trigger mean? But also, thank your shadow self for bringing that feeling to your attention. It's okay to feel jealous. It's okay to feel insecure. It's not okay to take it out on other people. So it's okay for her to look at the husband talking to the woman and have that twinge of jealousy because she has experienced that hurt before. But to go to her husband and accuse him of cheating on her just because he was talking to another woman is not okay. What she should do is go, oh, okay, thanks, shadow self. You reminded me that other person hurt me really bad. And I know that I can get hurt from this, but I also know that I trust this person. This person has been good to me, and he's given me no reason to think that he is doing what this other person did. Thank you for giving me that warning. I will keep a lookout for it, but I'm not going to presume the worst of him.
Or let it control my life.
And the other part of that pause is that part where you acknowledge, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Would you want, if you were talking to someone of the opposite sex innocently, would you want your spouse or significant other to immediately accuse you of cheating? No. So you want to treat that person the way you would want to be treated. So thank you, shadow self, for reminding me of this pain, bringing this to my attention. And I'm going to watch, but I'm choosing to trust until I see further signs, because if it was me, I would want someone to give me the benefit of the doubt. I love this person. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Same thing when Kristen and I are having our little, you're not listening to me. Pause. Let the other person speak their piece. Then once they've spoken their piece, you can thank your shadow self for getting you riled up, because obviously this is something that's important to you, right? Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Thank you for reminding me how impassioned I am about this topic. Now, I'm going to let her say her piece, and then I'm going to counter with my opinion as well, and hopefully she will give me,
but not be the person trying to have the last word.
But not in a way of trying to have the last word. Here's just my point of view. I wanted to share my point of view, or I was trying to say the same thing you were, just in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But you're acknowledging that other person has a right to speak their mind as well. They have a right to have a differing opinion.
Yeah.
And they're not trying to tell you that your opinion is invalid, hopefully, just because they're stating a different opinion.
Right. And if they are telling you your opinion is invalid, that's on them.
That's
not you.
Yes.
Because we all have our own
That doesn't mean that your opinion is invalid. That means they have a problem.
Right.
Yeah. And what other people think of you is not your business.
Yep.
It's not. Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
So, I would like to know, though, if there are other ways to accomplish shadow work. Like I said, acknowledge it, work through it.
Yeah, I find that obviously doing the artwork, it's a process. It needs time. It needs space and quiet and peace. Just like the journaling, I feel like that also makes it difficult to do, because you need peace and quiet and time. In order to answer some of these questions, it's not something that I can do in 5 minutes. I need like an hour of writing, and my hand does not write as much as it used to, and therefore I find that it's a little bit harder. But at the same time, typing doesn't always give the same effect.
Right.
Because you can just delete what you wrote.
Right.
And I feel like because it takes so much longer,
you can be slower and think about what you're actually writing.
Say. Right. And because it takes twice as long to write a word as it does to type it, or even less to say it, I think that you think a little bit harder about what it is that you're saying, and you're more poignant with what you write.
Precise about what you write.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Not even you don't have to be poignant, but that's what I mean. Like more precise. And just that whole piece about it being the truth.
as you know it.
If you did something in your life that you've carried guilt about, like maybe you hurt someone deliberately or on
or
accident,
even unintentionally,
that's what I mean, either deliberately or on accident, and you are carrying that burden, or maybe you've blacked that out and you've chosen not to admit or address it. Actually taking that time to sit down and write it is challenging. And sometimes there's things that we have done or experienced in our lives that we don't even really remember.
Yeah.
And so sitting down and actually writing them down makes them more real than just a memory, because in essence, your memory doesn't exist.
I have had things that happened to me when I was younger that I had forgotten until something triggered it and brought back oh yeah, I remember that this, and it's not that I blacked it out or forgot it. It's just I pushed it aside and didn't think about it. Yeah. And I didn't want to think about it. I did that on purpose. I don't want to think about that. I'm going to push that aside and not think about that. And then many years later, something will happen and it reminds me of that situation. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of like that. And, and it's like, I really need to work through that, I think. But a lot of people don't work through those things. A lot of people go, I don't want to go there. I don't want to work through that. I just want to continue on. But the thing is, you are never going to
be content.
You're not going to be content. You're not going to be happy. You're not going to find peace.
Because your mind is always trying to circumnavigate that.
It's trying to go around it and going around it. And the best way to get through a problem is to go through it. Really is. You have to go through it. You can't go around it. You have to go through it. And in order to go through it, you have to face it and think about it and dig deep. And maybe you're not ready now, but maybe you can start hacking away at the pieces of it, kind of like the miners trapped in the coal mine and the rescuers are on the outside digging their way in, but you can be on the inside trying to dig your way out at the same time, just a little bit at a time. Chink, 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 chink. And eventually you will break through. It doesn't have to be a big thing.
Shadow work is not something that happens overnight.
Oh, absolutely not. It's going to be little pieces over time, little bits. And there's lots of little pieces of shadow that we all carry in us. And you're not going to address all of them all at once. You're going to find one little thing that triggers you, and you're going to start thinking about that and why it triggers you and how you can change your mindset about that trigger. And mostly it's just acknowledging. A lot of it is just starting with acknowledging that it exists.
Yes. And not giving it not
letting it have power over you.
And also not cursing it either.
Right. It's a part of you.
Yes.
It is. You have to integrate it into your psyche.
Which is the last step of shadow work, is the integration part.
Yeah. And there's work. It's work. I'm not going to pretend it's easy, and it's never done. I think we'll all go to our graves still working on that, unless we're an enlightened being,
So I do look forward to anyone who has other ideas that they'd like to share about shadow work. Have you done shadow work? Are you planning on doing shadow work? Did this inspire you or give you a new idea or perspective on how to journal or work on yourself? Definitely reach out and share your comments on modernmusings.net. What are we discussing next week?
We are kind of heading into our pre-Valentine's season. It's a short one. with the greatest love story. And we'll figure out what that means.
Yes, definitely.
Excited. All right. So, we do want to give special thanks to Red Door Studios and Creative Audio Tech for our music and recording equipment. And we'd also like to thank our loyal listeners. If you'd enjoyed this podcast, please give us a good rating and share the feed with your friends. We would really appreciate that. And don't forget to check out the blog. If you're only listening to the podcast, you're only getting part of the story. I believe that is all for this week. We'll catch you next week.
Bye.
Bye.